There was no countdown, no press briefing, no dramatic music playing over a live stream. One day, a massive folder of images simply appeared on NASA's public servers, over 12,000 photographs from the Artemis II mission, and almost no one noticed. No cable news segment picked it up. No trending hashtag erupted. The agency that once stopped an entire nation with its moon broadcasts just quietly placed the most significant collection of human spaceflight photography since the Apollo era onto a government website and walked away. And that silence, more than anything else, is what makes this release so striking. Because what's inside those 12,000 frames is not quiet at all. Artemis II was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most audacious things humanity has done in over half a century. In late 2024, NASA launched 4 astronauts, Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, mission specialist Christina Koch, and mission specialist Jeremy Hansen, aboard the Orion spacecraft on a trajectory that carried them further from Earth than any human crew since Apollo 17 in December 1972. They did not land on the moon. This was a test flight, a shakedown cruise for the hardware that will eventually put boots back on the lunar surface. But calling Artemis II just a test flight is like calling Lindbergh's transatlantic crossing just a plane ride. The distance alone, over 268,000 miles from Earth at its farthest point, is enough to place it in a category that very few things in human history can share. And the 4 people aboard brought cameras. Lots of cameras. The archive itself is something of a puzzle to navigate. NASA's image hosting platform is not exactly built for casual browsing. Pages load slowly. The search function is limited. Images are sorted in ways that feel more like a database export than a curated gallery. A significant portion of the 12,000 images are near-identical duplicates, taken in rapid succession for technical documentation purposes. Multiple exposures of the same scene at slightly different settings, sequence brackets, and calibration frames that were never meant to be artistic statements. Some are blurry. A handful are so overexposed they register as almost pure white. You have to wade through a lot of noise to find the signal. But the signal, when you find it, is extraordinary. The collection represents 2 very different photographic philosophies operating simultaneously aboard the same spacecraft. The first is the professional mission documentation approach, high-resolution Nikon cameras loaded with a kind of glass that costs more than most people's cars, operated by trained astronauts following photographic protocols designed to capture maximum scientific and historical value from every frame. These images are crisp, technically precise, and often breathtaking in a way that feels almost clinical. Every shadow on every crater is resolved. Every atmospheric layer of Earth glows with the kind of detail that makes your eyes slow down and search. The second approach is something genuinely new for NASA. The agency issued the crew smartphones specifically to document the mission in an informal, human-scale way. The iPhone photographs in this archive feel almost jarring at first, because they look like something a person took. Not an agency, not a mission, not a program, a person. The color grading is warmer. The compositions are slightly off-center in ways that feel natural rather than calculated. There are moments of spontaneity embedded in the framing that no official photographer protocol would ever produce. One crew member apparently decided to photograph the Earth at roughly the same angle and focal length you'd use to photograph a full moon from your backyard. The result is disorienting in the best possible way. Let's start with the Earth photographs, because they form the emotional spine of everything else in this archive. When the Artemis II crew looked back at our planet from 250,000 miles away, they were looking at something that no camera on the ground, no satellite in low orbit, and no telescope pointing inward can ever quite replicate. They were looking at Earth the way you'd look at a marble held in your palm, the whole thing visible at once, surrounded entirely by nothing. And they photographed it obsessively. There are hundreds of Earth images in this archive, and the range of perspectives, lighting conditions, and orbital geometries they cover is staggering. The crescent Earth photographs are among the most psychologically unusual images in the entire collection. We are all deeply familiar with crescent moons. We see them every month, hanging low in the evening sky, and they read to our brains as normal, beautiful, expected. When you see a crescent Earth, your brain performs a quiet double-take. The shape is familiar, that same elegant sliver of illuminated sphere against absolute darkness, but the color is wrong. It's blue. And the scale is wrong. And something in the deep pattern recognition machinery of human perception keeps insisting that what you're seeing should be the moon and not the planet you were born on. Several of the crescent Earth shots were captured through the Orion's windows, and those images carry an additional layer of meaning. The windows of a spacecraft are not pristine optical surfaces. They accumulate smudges from handling, microparticles from the environment, and the gradual fogging that comes from a pressurized vessel operating in the thermal extremes of deep space. In most photography, this would be a flaw to be corrected. In these images, the imperfect glass becomes something else: evidence. The smears and haze on the window remind you that a living, breathing human being was pressed up against that surface trying to photograph home. The glass did not clean itself. Someone cleaned it, or didn't, and either way they were there, and the photograph proves it. Some of the Earth images in the archive were taken at distances where individual continents are clearly identifiable. You can trace the coastlines of Australia, pick out the Sahara's rust-colored expanse, follow the spine of the Andes along the western edge of South America. The cloud systems above the Pacific are organized into spiral patterns that reveal the rotation of storms you'd never see from the ground. The thin blue line of the atmosphere glows at the planet's curved edge with a fragility that seems almost theatrical, as if it were a special effect added in post-production. It isn't. That genuinely is the entire breathable envelope of a planet, and it's thinner, relative to Earth's diameter, than the skin of an apple. The lunar surface photography in this archive does something to you if you sit with it long enough. We have been looking at images of the moon for our entire lives. It appears in children's books. It hangs above every night scene in every painting from every culture in human history. We know its face, the dark Maria, the bright highlands, the familiar arrangement of craters that make up the patterns people have been naming since prehistoric times. The moon is perhaps the most photographed object in human history, and most of us would say we know what it looks like. These photographs will make you reconsider that confidence. Part of what shifts is the perspective. The Artemis II spacecraft did not simply orbit the near side and photograph the familiar face. The mission trajectory carried the crew on a free return loop that took them around the far side of the moon, the hemisphere that permanently faces away from Earth and that no human eye observed until a Soviet probe photographed it in 1959. Only 12 people in all of human history have ever flown around the far side of the moon, and the first 8 did so between 1968 and 1972. For more than 50 years after Gene Cernan left the lunar surface, the far side remained unvisited by humans. The Artemis II crew changed that. The far side looks different. This is not a subjective impression, it is a geological fact. The near side is marked by vast, relatively smooth basaltic plains called Maria, formed billions of years ago when giant impacts punctured the crust and allowed magma to flood and solidify across huge areas. The far side has almost none of these features. Instead, it is ancient, battered, and densely cratered terrain that has been absorbing impacts since the solar system was young. It looks heavier, somehow. More wounded. More like the surface of a world that has been standing guard. The Oriental Basin dominates several of the far side images. This is one of the largest and best-preserved impact structures in the solar system, a multi-ringed basin roughly 580 miles across, formed roughly 3.8 billion years ago when an asteroid approximately the size of a small city hit the lunar surface with unimaginable force. From orbit, its concentric ring structure is clearly visible, a set of enormous curved scarps rippling outward from a central depression like the frozen shockwave of a cosmic collision. Most of what we knew about Oriental before now came from oblique photographs taken by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter and the incomplete views possible from Earth-based telescopes at the extreme edge of the lunar disk during favorable libration. These new images show it from directly above, from a human spacecraft, in high resolution, for the first time. There is a particular category of photograph in this archive that deserves its own extended attention: the images that place Earth and Moon in the same frame simultaneously. This is much harder to achieve than it sounds, and the fact that the archive contains so many of them is a direct consequence of the specific orbital mechanics of the Artemis II trajectory. A spacecraft traveling from Earth to the Moon on a direct approach path essentially leaves one body and approaches the other. There's a long middle section of the journey where neither world is particularly photogenic because you're too close to one and too far from the other. The free return loop that Artemis II flew is different. The trajectory curves around the Moon and begins looping back toward Earth, and during this return arc, the geometry frequently places both worlds in the same general direction from the spacecraft's perspective. The crew exploited this relentlessly. The dual-world photographs in this archive operate on multiple levels at once. On the purely visual level, they are striking compositions, the gray, battered sphere of the moon offset against the vivid blue-white-tan complexity of Earth, both of them suspended in a black so absolute it has no texture, no depth, no reference point. But on a conceptual level, they are something more unsettling. They are photographs of the entire accessible universe of human existence, both worlds that any living person has ever stood on or even approached, captured in a single frame by a camera held by someone who was standing on neither of them. Now, to the photograph that stands above everything else in this archive. It is a window shot. The glass is imperfect, fogged slightly, crossed by a faint smear that probably happened during a routine equipment check days before this moment. Beyond the glass, Earth hangs in the blackness, reduced by distance to a thin crescent of blue light so fragile it seems like it could be extinguished by a thought. The planet appears small enough that you could cover it with the nail of your smallest finger. And reflected in the interior surface of that same window, visible only if you look carefully, only if you let your eyes adjust to the layered depths of the image, is a hand. Open, palm toward the glass, fingers slightly spread. Not gripping anything. Not pointing. Simply there, suspended in the reflection, reaching toward a planet that is 400,000 kilometers away. We do not know whose hand it is. NASA made a deliberate choice, honoring a request from the crew themselves, not to identify which astronaut took which photograph. So the hand belongs to one of 4 people, and we are not meant to know which one. It could belong to the commander, a veteran astronaut who has spent months in low Earth orbit but who was experiencing something categorically different on this flight, not the familiar loop around a planet, but the genuine frontier. It could belong to the pilot, floating at a window during the long radio silence on the far side, in a moment of solitude that almost no human being has ever experienced. It could belong to the mission specialist who already holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a female astronaut and who was here adding another line to a resume that needed no additions. It could belong to the Canadian on his first flight, the man who, on the very first occasion he ever left the ground, also left the planet. The deliberate anonymity is the point. The hand is not a specific person's hand. It is the hand of someone who traveled further than almost anyone who has ever lived, who looked back through a dirty piece of glass at a thin blue crescent, and reached. Not to fix something. Not to document something. Just to reach. The way a child reaches for something bright and distant. The way anyone does, at any moment in their life, when they are looking at something beautiful and slightly impossible and they want, instinctively, to touch it. 12,000 photographs is not a small number. It is a library. It is an archive. It is, in a very real sense, a record of 4 human beings deciding that everything they were experiencing was worth saving, that the Earth seen from the other side of the moon deserved to be captured again and again from slightly different angles, in slightly different light, through slightly different windows, because no single frame could hold all of it. NASA did not throw a party when they released these images. They placed them on a server and said nothing, and in doing so they handed the rest of us something unusual, an unmediated encounter with what Artemis II actually was, before the retrospectives, before the documentaries, before the years of interpretation turn it into mythology. Right now, these photographs are just photographs. Raw, wide-ranging, occasionally blurry, often astonishing records of 4 people who went further than almost any human being has ever gone and spent a significant portion of their time pointing cameras at home. The hand in the window is the summary of all of it. Everything the mission was, everything it meant, everything we hope the Artemis program becomes, the return to the moon, the eventual crewed landing, the long-term presence, the step beyond, all of it is prefigured in that one small gesture. A hand, a window, a planet, and 400,000 kilometers of dark space between them. They went. They looked back. They reached. They came home. And now, quietly and without fanfare, they gave us 12,000 chances to reach too.